As I mentioned, President Biden today met with several world leaders at an emergency NATO summit to apply more Putin pressure. The president announced the U.S. will send $1 billion in aid to Ukraine and welcome 100,000 refugees to the U.S. We can do more than that. He also said Putin was wrong to assume NATO would be divided over the invasion. Of course, Biden had to leave everyone a little confused when a reporter asked about the effects of sanctions on Russia. Watch.
Let's get something straight. You remember, if you covered me from the very beginning, I did not say that, in fact, the sanctions would deter him. Sanctions never deter. You keep talking about that. Sanctions never deter. The maintenance of sanctions, the increasing the pain.
It's our president, you guys. Just last month, our vice president said the complete opposite.
The purpose of the sanctions has always been and continues to be deterrence. And the allied relationship is such that we have agreed that the deterrence effect of these sanctions is still a meaningful one.
Clean up on aisle Biden. So why isn't the administration on the same page? And can the rest of the world trust us to lead the planet out of this mess? Let's meet tonight's party panel. We've got conservative strategist and Z-Lab's public relations vice president, Chris Barron, is back in the basement. We've got Democrat pollster and co-host of The Five, Jessica Tarlov, is back. Cleo's mom. Oh my God, Jesse, you look amazing. And the host of the Part of the Problem podcast. If you've listened to his podcast, you know that he has had some stunning analysis. Always and forever. Dave Smith is back. Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Hi. Chris, let's start with President Biden. And, you know, it's like, as Americans, we should be supporting the president. We should hope that he uses his power for good and, you know, brings the world into peace and prosperity. Do you have faith that will happen?
No. And I really want to in this moment. I mean, trust me when I say that this is one of those moments where you want to have faith in your president. You want to trust in your president. You want to have one of those kind of lift you up moments. Listening to Joe Biden say that he never said that sanctions were going to be a deterrent, like reporters have just made this up out of thin air, is complete and total BS. We just heard Kamala Harris talk about how this was a deterrence. And by the way, sanctions can be a deterrence, especially if they're implemented early and powerfully. The fact is they tried to half-ass their way through this, as usual. And now he's talking about sanctions. And when he got the follow-up question asking him whether or not he thought the sanctions would actually affect how Russia acted towards Ukraine, he said no. So why is he even bothering with sanctions? If he said they're not going to be a deterrent and they weren't going to change Russia's behavior, then why is he even pursuing sanctions? I mean, this was a bad moment for the president. This was a bad moment for the country. And this is a moment where we need to have some faith in our leadership.
Well, let's talk to Dr. Tarlov. Because she does have a PhD in all of this. So, Jessica, what is the function of sanctions? Because critics of this administration, even some Democrats, have said that the president and vice president should have telegraphed more specifically what the triggers to sanctions would have been before Russia invaded Ukraine to stave off some of the horrific bloodshed. So should they have acted sooner? Should they have enacted sanctions before the invasion? And if they're not a deterrent, what are they?
Well, I did always think that they certainly could serve as a deterrent because it was something that you're putting on them to inflict pain into a country, whether it's the oligarchs or the everyday Russians. The idea was that it would be painful enough that would rise to the top. Obviously, Vladimir Putin's life is going to be fine for however long he exists, right? He's always going to have money. He's going to be able to live in the Kremlin in a bunker down there, if that's what it is, and still have all the dill that he wants. But the issue here for President Biden, even if he did have the right idea, and we were consistently leaking intelligence that we knew that this was going to happen, is that he needed all of the rest of NATO to sign on with him for this. This isn't something that we could have unilaterally done. And I do think that he deserves, frankly, a good pat on the back for the job that he has done in bringing together all of NATO leadership. When you look at the way that a country like Germany has reversed course in terms of how they would usually handle something like this, which is basically to say, we're dependent on Russian oil, I don't really want to deal with this, to then go to that they're building up their military, that they have sanctioned every bit of Russian industry. It's a pretty big deal. And I think that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have shown a number of times, obviously, to not have been on the same page with this. And I don't know if he has said before that they were to deter. Obviously, the VP is an important element of the administration, and that should be a unified message. But I have failed to see what Republicans or critics of the Biden approach are offering instead that isn't just let's go to nuclear war, because I don't know how much they could be doing at this moment. There are a lot of
Democrats who are being incredibly hawkish, and as Jeff Dice pointed out last night, he was actually impressed at the restraint that Jen Psaki and President Biden have shown so far in talking about American troops in Ukraine and fighting in a no-fly zone and everything else. So, Dave, what if sanctions don't work?
Yeah, well, that's, they've already not worked, right? At least according to Kamala Harris, who said the purpose was deterrence, and several other people in the administration said that as well. And certainly they didn't deter this. But I think there's a very strong case to make that sanctions are not a deterrent, but rather a provocation. And the idea that if they were just a little bit stronger, I mean, there's not a lot of empirical evidence to back that up. But in the decade leading up to George W. Bush's war in Iraq, we had debatably the strongest sanctions ever against Saddam Hussein. They didn't do anything to deter the war. It led to a horrific war where somewhere in the ballpark of 1 million people died. And, when Joe Biden talks about how the purpose is to cause pain, as Jessica kind of alluded to there, that the pain is going to be felt by who? Oligarchs who will have one of their yachts seized? I mean, who do you think really feels this pain as Joe Biden brags that sanctions have led to the currency collapsing in Russia? Oh, it's going to be little old ladies, the most vulnerable people you can imagine. And it's amazing how I appreciate that we have all this humanity toward the people of Ukraine, but it's amazing in the middle of this war propaganda how we're supposed to lose all humanity for the Russian people who are, if Vladimir Putin's such a big bad guy who is a dictator or whatever he's called, then really his people aren't responsible for what he does. I mean, just imagine, think about the most vulnerable person you know, some little 90-year-old lady in your town. How much should her life be ruined because of the war in Iraq?
Well, I think, and you're absolutely right about that. And people are maligning, Russian citizens. And that's inappropriate. That's not what should be happening here. And also the trickle-down sanctionomics, if your goal is to make people wait for 5 hours in bread lines and make them starve, that's cruel. And that also hasn't worked with North Korea. They're 5 inches shorter than their South Korean counterparts. So at some point,
congratulations.
The messaging is off. But at some point, we have to acknowledge that maybe sanctions for a rational person would work. When you tell a rational person, we're going to take everything away from you, it might change their behavior. But assuming that Vladimir Putin is now going to make rational decisions, that in itself is insanity. Now, meanwhile, okay.
No, I don't know about that, Kennedy. I mean, look, everybody has incentives, and he might be wrong and immoral, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing that can motivate him. And if the goal right now, which should be the most important goal in the history of humanity, to avoid a war between U.S. and Russia, and then secondarily to that, to limit the bloodshed as much as possible, we should see a mass effort toward diplomacy right now, not starving innocent people and not killing innocent people. The effort should be to find a deal where we can end this war as soon as possible.
So
who does that? Think that's what they're trying to do? I don't understand. You see everyone, all the leaders of NATO standing up there. Everyone has a common goal. Everyone is on the same page. That's an incredibly difficult task to accomplish. I don't want any ordinary Russian suffering here.
They're not even trying, Jessica.
What?
There is no serious attempt right now to say, look, how about this? How about we offer Vladimir Putin a treaty that says we will never bring Ukraine into NATO since that's his stated concern, and we will end all sanctions contingent upon his immediate withdrawal from the war. I'm not saying that's a guarantee to work, but why not try it? Why the obsession with punishing innocent Russian people?
There have been in exchanges back and forth from Ukrainian officials and Russian officials that has been offered. In fact, it's that Putin also wants the eastern territories and he wants to keep Crimea. Yes, it has been. It's been widely reported that that's going on with their interpersonal negotiations. So,
a treaty has not been offered, but Vladimir Putin wanting the Donbass region.
Let's bring Chris in here. Hold on. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, by the way,
But Dave's absolutely right. The answer here is we should be trying to end the bloodshed as quickly as possible. What's happening in Ukraine is an absolute disaster, a disaster that we haven't seen in decades and decades. And we should be doing everything that we can to end that bloodshed. And frankly, that's not the effort right now. The effort is not to end this bloodshed. Look, the U.S. has made it very clear they're not going to send troops in to defend the Ukrainians. They're not going to. They've been very clear about this from the very beginning. So the only way that this is going to end is a negotiated settlement. And that's what we ought to be aiming for. And by the way, like I said, Dave is right. And today the administration said that Russians aren't even answering their phone calls.
Well, maybe the United States, if we do want to end the war, if we want to make sure that people don't suffer and die, then maybe the United States isn't in the best position to do that. You know, maybe Israel is the only party who's going to step forward and sit the necessary actors down so they can hammer something out. Because what we're doing right now...
Maybe we can't pretend that we're such humanitarians when the United States federal government has been the greatest purveyor of violence in the world over the last 20 years. But all of a sudden, our hearts bleed when Russia starts a war of aggression. I'm not excusing it, but we really don't have much of a leg to stand on after Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Pakistan.
No,
we don't have much of a leg to stand on.
I don't trust the federal government, but I do trust Americans who are going over and risking their lives to help other people. I talked to Brett Velikovich. He's going to be on my podcast tomorrow. We talked at length about people who are going over. They don't have guns, but they're trying to get stranded people, especially Americans, out of war zones and into safety because they're good people who are trying to make things better. And there's so many Americans who are like that. I have not lost faith in them. All right, the panel is going to stick around. It is game night, and they're going to do it right because you know what we need? We need a little bit of a breather, party people. Coming up.